Great, so now you should have your server set up on your computer. So now I think it's time that we should start experimenting with some of the server-side scripting itself. So let's start making some back-end language files, and let's see how it communicates with the database, and let's start doing some stuff from scratch so that you really understand it well. So to do that, I think we're going to make a little site. That will just be made of a form in which a user can put in their username, their email, and a password, and then those three points of data will get put into a database that we're going to make, and then those three things of data can be retrieved and displayed on the page, and we're going to do it from scratch. So first thing to do, and you should follow along, first thing to do is just to make a new page like this, and you've got to save it as a PHP file in your htdocs folder, which is in your Apache folder, if you remember. So Windows C, Apache, and htdocs, and this is where all your files are going to be stored, if you remember. So you save this file as, let's save it as form, and then save it as a PHP. I think you have to scroll down a bit and save. Okay, so now we've got form.php. See, here I've still got the index, so to get to the form.php, just type in form.php. If you have PHP, you should get that loading without any errors. Obviously, it's an empty page still. And we're just going to go ahead and write the HTML content that then will actually get displayed on the page. So here we want just a form, but let's start it with the doc type. I know it's kind of confusing that you have to write the doc type even though it's a PHP page, because you're saying that the doc type is HTML when it's actually PHP. But it's just better to have it there, because some browsers will create problems if you don't have it. So it's just best. And then you open up with the HTML tag, and you close the HTML tag at the end. And remember, you have these little tags, these opening and closing arrows, and to signify that it's a closing tag, you just put a slash. Then we don't need to worry about the head, because that's not, for this page, it's not too important. And we create a body. And the body is just where all the content will be. And we're not going to worry about styling for this, because it's just going to waste time. So we'll make an ugly site, but that can show off the server side part. So now we have a body. If we write hello world, it should display up here. Yep. So it works perfectly fine. And I touched upon it before, but you might be confused why we're writing HTML in a PHP page, but it's just because this is going to be loaded to the browser, and we're going to write up some PHP up here later, and that gets opened up like this. But you can see if you wrote just an HTML page, you couldn't write this HTML part, PHP part here. You could only write this, and we need the server-side backend language in the same file so that the form can communicate with it. But we'll see that later. In the meantime, let's just build the form. So to build a form, you just have a form tag, and a form tag is just a form is just where a user can put in inputs. So for dynamic pages, so where a user can put in information and take information out from a database, a form is very important, because it's the point of access for the user to the site. So we put the form, and we'll have to call the method. And the method is the way that the HTTP request is going to be performed, because when you submit a form, you actually have to send an HTTP request to the server. And there are two different methods. There's the get method and the post method. Okay? And there are two different methods, and the difference, I'll show you the difference now, but let's start with get. It's a bit easier to understand. So let's say I'll put a simple input. You have to specify the type. The default type is text, but we're going to put it anyway, just to make it clear. And then you can just leave it at that. And then a submit button. So input, because it's again a type of input, and this time the type you have to specify it as a submit. and close it off. For inputs, you don't need to write a closing tag, but you need to close off the tag itself. So there you have it. Okay, so now we have a text field and a submit. And see that I said that the method is get, right? What happens here is if I put in an input like John, let's say if it's a name, I submit it. I should specify the name. Forgot about that. You have to specify the name of the input because that's what the PHP is going to receive. So username. Let's say if I put John. So here it's going to return a URL with the question mark, meaning and the question mark just specifies that a GET request has been made, and then it will specify the name and then what the value is. So it's easy to understand how a form works when you put the method as being get, because get just means that you put the value in the URL so everybody can see it, the user can see it, and everybody can see it. And the PHP, the great thing about the form thing is that the PHP can then receive that value. So in the PHP, if you put get, which is a global variable, then you specify what the name is, username. Now the PHP has that variable, and you can call it something. So let's say uname equals to that. Okay. And we display it somewhere here. Span. Open another PHP, because the PHP can go anywhere in the HTML page. It just needs to be specified in, as long as it's a PHP page, PHP file. It just needs to be open and closed with these opening and closing PHP signs. And then we say echo, and then uname. Okay. So here, so here you can see that the PHP is displaying this variable here, which it got from the GET request, which was sent by the form, which then the user can see in the URL. So that's what a GET request is, and it's an HTTP request. When you put it in the username John, if I change it to Mary, submit it, it's sending an HTTP request back to the server through a GET request, and the server is returning this value, and it's getting it through there. So it can, and it displays it through there, and that's what it's doing here with the echo. It's returning it to the server. So I was saying about the post method as well. And the post method just means that it's exactly like this. It works exactly the same, except that you don't see it in the URL. So it doesn't send it to the URL, and you can't. It's just a bit less clear. So if you want to have hidden values, like passwords and things, post is better, and it's a bit more elegant. So you need to call it from the post global variable, but then it will work exactly in the same way. Like that. Post username. Oh yeah, then one important thing in PHP is that here it will give you quite detailed errors, which is very good. So you can see here that it says that there's an undefined index, which is username, and that's because I haven't yet posted any username. I still haven't put in the value here and then submitted it. If I put a value here and I submit it, then it will show it without the error, because now this is set. But if it's not set yet, then this is going to be a completely undefined variable, which then PHP can't deal with. So the first thing to do is just to check if it's set. So you write isSet, which is a very useful function. So isSet, you're just checking if the user has put in a value yet. And then if it's set, you make uname equals to that. And if it's not set, just so that you don't get any other errors, you have to set it equals to nothing. So equals to nothing. So then it will return no errors. So even if you load it with no posts, here earlier it got an error because I still haven't put anything. It won't show anything because it's filtering out if it's set or not. So here it's saying, is it set? If it's set, then uname will equals to that. Else, it's equals to nothing. And in this case, uname is equals to nothing. So there's no errors, and it's a perfectly functional code. So that's how the HTTP request up to the PHP works, and it's quite neat because anything that the user puts in here, they can basically the server can then do stuff with and then put into the database. So here, for example, I could say, okay, you can contact the database and say, I'm going to put in this value into this specific table, and you store it there until I select it again, and that's the next stage of the process. But before that, let's just add a few other input fields. So let's say this is really just a little example, but let's say we're making a sign up page for we're not going to style it again, but just the sign up inputs. So we'll say create a username, and then put in your email address. And here there's actually a type called email, in which it will, if you don't put an @ or you don't put a gmail.com or something, then it will give you an error on the client side and saying, please enter a correct email address, which is quite useful. So we'll call that email, and the name is just this. It's what the PHP is going to recognize it by. It's not a class. It's not a class in which you can style it by, but it's just it's the value which is going to be sent through HTTP when the form is submitted. So email, and then a password, and again there's a useful input field called password, which will display all the digits as being little stars so that people can't see it looking over the shoulder. Name, password. Okay, so now we can see what that will look like. Now you can see that they're all in a row. Doesn't look too good, so I'll just add style display. Okay, so that's okay. Actually, it might not be working, but actually for this example, it's totally fine. Okay, so I mean we have 3 input fields here, and I'll show you different settings that you can put for each type of input so that you don't get this autocomplete here, which it can be quite annoying for